blind, have low vision, or have another print disability which makes reading, holding a book, or turning a page difficult or impossible. The content is copyrighted by the respective publishers. For more information, please visit us on the web at nfradioreading.org.
Good morning. This is George Collins, and for the next hour, I will be reading from the Wall Street Journal, the February 20th, 2026 issue, today's issue, in other words. And I will be reading the Wall Street Journal to you on the Niagara Frontier Radio reading service. Headlines in today's Wall Street Journal. United Kingdom ex-Prince, Prince Andrew, arrested amid Epstein probe. King Charles says the royal family backs the full investigation of Andrew's conduct. British police arrested Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, the former Prince Andrew, on suspicion of misconduct in public office as revelations linked to Jeffrey Epstein, royal British politics, and the royal family. King Charles III said he had learned of the arrest of his younger brother with, quote, deepest concern, close quote. But that the royal family supported a full investigation. He said, quote, let me state clearly, the law must take its course, close quote. The police did not disclose the exact allegations that they were investigating, but the arrest comes after disclosures about his dealings with Epstein that have dominated headlines in the United Kingdom. A cache of emails recently released by the U.S. Justice Department show Mountbatten Windsor's personal and business interactions with the convicted sex offender were far more extensive and went on for far longer than previously known. Mountbatten Windsor was being questioned by police on Thursday and had not been charged. Police said Mountbatten Windsor had been released under investigation. The former prince has consistently denied any wrongdoing in relation to his dealings with Epstein and did not respond to requests for comment. President Trump said the arrest was, quote, very, very sad and so bad for the royal family, close quote. Sorry, that's my imitation of... No, never mind. He praised King Charles. Let's see what he's praising King Charles about. I'm sure it's for not standing in the way of justice. He praised Prince Charles, or King Charles, as a wonderful man. Police said they were carrying out searches at addresses in Berkshire, which is home to Mountbatten Windsor's former residence, and Norfolk, where he's currently living in a cottage on an estate owned by the king. The arrest on Thursday, which is Mountbatten Windsor's 66th birthday, deepens a spectacular fall from grace for the third child of the late Queen Elizabeth II, following years of scandal and sex abuse allegations. It marks the first time that a royal has been taken into custody since King Charles I during the English Civil War in the 1640s. A lengthy police investigation and a possible criminal trial could see the shadow of the Epstein scandal hanging over the British royal family for months. The recently released files suggest that Mountbatten Windsor forwarded confidential government reports to Epstein while the royal was serving as a trade envoy in 2010, and that Epstein introduced him to several women, including some he hosted at Buckingham Palace. This month, police said they were looking into 2 complaints involving the former prince stemming from the recently released files. One was that he reportedly disclosed confidential government information, and the other was a report that a woman was taken to an address in Windsor in 2010, quote, for sexual purposes, period, close quote. Mountbatten Windsor said in the past that he cut off all contact with the disgraced financier in late 2010. The emails showed the pair kept in touch through a close business associate of Epstein's until a year before Epstein was found dead in his jail cell in 2019. Mountbatten Windsor has not commented publicly on the emails. Mountbatten Windsor reached a settlement with one of Epstein's victims, Virginia Giuffre, in 2022 over allegations that the then prince abused her on several occasions in the early 2000s when she was a teenager. Charles has moved to put distance between himself and his younger brother. Mountbatten Windsor was barred from using his royal titles last year, but remains eighth in line to the throne. Still, the latest disclosures threaten to tarnish the image of the royal family and the country's relationship with its monarchy. Much now hinges on what the probe into Mountbatten Windsor unearths. The British public has proved resilient in its support for the crown during various previous scandals, said Robert Hazel, an expert on the British Constitution and professor at University College London. The key question will be if Charles, quote, acted wrongly himself, and there is no indication of that, close quote, he said. Lawyers said proving misconduct in office is difficult. The offense, quote, the offense is notoriously hard to prosecute due to the number of different elements that the prosecution is required to prove and the narrow definitions therein applied by the courts, said Andrew Gilmore, who is a partner at the Grosvenor law firm. The scandal has reverberated through British politics. Police have said they are also investigating Peter Mandelson, the former United Kingdom ambassador to the U.S., for alleged misconduct in public office after the tranche of emails also suggested Mandelson had forwarded market-sensitive information to Epstein while in the British cabinet. Mandelson has quit the House of Lords, which is the upper chamber of the United Kingdom Parliament, and was removed from his job last year in relation to the scandal. Prime Minister Keir Starmer has come under pressure for having appointed Mandelson, despite knowing about his links to Epstein. He has said Mandelson lied to him about the depth of those links. Mandelson has denied wrongdoing, but has apologized to the victims of Epstein. Several other British police forces have said they are assessing whether to launch investigations relating to the Epstein files. The Essex and Bedfordshire constabularies are looking at private flights in and out of London's Stansted and Luton airports, while London's Metropolitan Police has said it was making initial inquiries into allegations involving royal protection officers who were assigned to Mountbatten Windsor. A follow-up story just underneath that said, after years of damaging headlines over his friendship with Epstein and allegations of sexually abusing a teenager, Andrew has been stripped of all of his titles and his Windsor mansion residence. His public disgrace, capped by his arrest Thursday, is unprecedented in modern British royal history. Here is a recap of his downfall. In the 1990s, he met Epstein through Ghislaine Maxwell in 1999. However, Andrew's secretary told the broadcaster that they met in the early 1990s. In 2010, Epstein was released from jail. Epstein, sentenced to 18 months in prison in 2008 for soliciting a minor for prostitution, is released. In 2015, the first sexual abuse allegations against Andrew were made public. Virginia Giuffre's allegations against Andrew were made public in U.S. court documents filed in Florida Virginia Giuffre's allegations against Andrew were made public in U.S. court documents filed in Florida as part of her lawsuit against Ghislaine Maxwell. She claimed she was forced to have sex with Andrew when she was 17, which Buckingham Palace denied, of course. A year later, Giuffre testified to a civil court in Manhattan that Epstein paid her $15,000 to have sex with the then prince. The prince denied the allegations at the time. In August of 2019, Epstein dies by suicide. Some say he was murdered because of the information he had on very important people. Died at age 66 in a Manhattan jail cell while awaiting federal sex trafficking charges. November of 2019, Andrew announces he will step back from public duties. He had an interview with the BBC that was widely seen as a disaster for him. He stepped back from, as I say, public duties as a royal. In the interview, he claims he doesn't remember meeting Geoffrey, despite a photo of him with his arm around her. August of 2021, Geoffrey sues Prince Andrew, accuses Andrew of raping and sexually abusing her. Geoffrey, I'm sorry. Geoffrey accuses Andrew of raping and sexually abusing her while she was a minor and a sex trafficking victim. The lawsuit filed in Manhattan seeks compensatory and punitive damages. In early 22, he settled the lawsuit by making a donation to her charity without admitting guilt. In January of 22, he was stripped of his royal titles and military affiliations by Queen Elizabeth as Buckingham Palace looked to distance itself from him. In April of 25, Virginia Geoffrey, at the age of 41, committed suicide. Her family said that she was a fierce warrior in the fight against sexual abuse and sex trafficking. Her memoir, which detailed her abuse, was released earlier this month. In October of 25, the final entry, Andrew was forced to renounce his Duke of York title and his Windsor Mansion residence. Andrew has certainly snatched defeat from the jaws of victory. He had the world by the tail and certainly did not do well. One last story. It's kind of a interesting story. Headline: Accomplice was set to flip on Epstein and then went dark. Jean-Luc Brunel was ready to turn on the man who had been his patron and partner. The French modeling scout was prepared to tell prosecutors what he knew about Epstein's sex trafficking. He was secretly negotiating in 2016 with lawyers representing Epstein's victims, according to newly released Justice Department files. Brunel's lawyer told them his client recruited girls for Epstein and had incriminating photographs. They discussed a date for Brunel to walk into the U.S. Attorney's office in New York in exchange for immunity. One of Epstein's best friends, I guess, Jean-Luc Brunel, has helped get girls. This is a quote. One of Epstein's good friends, Jean Brunel, has helped get girls. He's wanting to cooperate, according to handwritten notes taken by a federal prosecutor in February of 2016. Brunel is afraid of being prosecuted. Quote, close quote. And then Brunel went dark. Epstein had discovered that negotiations with Brunel were taking place. The files show on May 3rd, he fired off an email to Kathy Rumler, an attorney he corresponded with regularly. He wrote that Brunel was planning to go to the U.S. Attorney's office the following week. And one of Brunel's friends had, quote, had asked for $3 million so that Jean Brunel would not go in. Epstein told Rumler that Brunel was afraid he would be arrested if he didn't show up. Epstein wrote, "I want to know more." He also dismissed Brunel's lawyer and his friend as scammers and cast doubt on their credibility. Rumler, the lawyer, responded hours later, asking Epstein to call and explain. The next day, she wrote, "I'm awake now. I'm talking to Poe, Epstein's lawyer in Washington, in 20 minutes. It isn't clear from the documents why Brunel ultimately kept quiet. What is clear is that Brunel did not cooperate with prosecutors, and Epstein remained free for another 3 years until he was arrested in 2019. After Brunel stopped negotiations, he wasn't arrested, and prosecutors did not pursue him any further. David Boies, a very well-known, talented lawyer, one of the attorneys who filed civil lawsuits on behalf of Epstein's victims, said that Brunel's backing out set them back a couple of years. We know from our lawsuits that there were more than 50 girls that were trafficked after this. Brunel was a central figure in Epstein's orbit who used his position atop a U.S. modeling agency to recruit foreign girls and young women, securing work visas and providing the appearance of real employment. Okay, I think we will stop there. That's certainly enough this morning of this Epstein matter, which has been getting a lot of exposure, needless to say. Let me take this opportunity to wet my whistle and to remind you that you are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. All right, switching gears now to sports and the Olympics. Headline, Team USA beats Canada to take women's hockey gold. Despite trailing with 2 minutes remaining in regulation, the Americans tied the game at 1-1 before American skater Megan Keller stunned the Canadians and sealed a 2-1 victory in overtime. All right, the article begins. The women's hockey Olympic final was supposed to be an American coronation. For 58 minutes on Thursday, the guests of honor forgot to show up. The U.S. had steamrolled the competition here for 2 weeks, entering the decisive showdown against Canada, riding a wave of 5 consecutive shutout victories and carrying an overall goal differential of 31 goals to 1 by their opponents. That's incredible. But late in the third period, with Canada having led 1-0 for the first 2 periods, late in the third period with a gold medal on the line, the Americans found themselves in a wholly unfamiliar position, behind on the scoreboard. Up until that point, the U.S. had looked like a dream team, and now it was barely clinging to life. What happened next was even more impressive than any blowout victory. With the seconds melting away, team captain Hillary Knight redirected a Layla Edwards slapshot between her legs and into the net to tie the score at 1-1. A dramatic goal to force overtime. 5 minutes later, Megan Keller danced her way past one defender, then threaded the puck past Canadian goalie Anne-Renee Desbiens to propel Team USA to an instant classic 2-1 victory. When it ended, the Americans were exactly where they expected to be, standing atop the podium for the first time in 8 years. They might not have been untouchable, but now they were the Olympic champions. Knight said that it was a matter of time, just leaning on them slowly. Knight is a 5-time Olympian. I think this was her last Olympics. International women's hockey has never been a particularly competitive enterprise. The U.S. and Canada have combined to win every Olympic gold since the event was introduced in 1998, resulting in a bitter cross-border feud that has powered the sport for decades. And the feud, I'm sure, has worsened with how Trump has treated the Canadian government and the Canadian people since taking office in January of 2025. But lately, what was once a battle for global supremacy hadn't been much of a rivalry at all. Over the past year, the United States had dominated Canada to the north, winning each of the past 7 games before Thursday. That included a matchup in the round-robin stage of the Olympics, where the Americans won 5-0, which was a real beatdown, the most lopsided defeat Canada had ever suffered at the Olympic Games. There was no reason to think that Thursday would be any different. The Americans were faster and stronger than the Canadians. They came with a turbocharged offensive unit and a suffocating defense. Star goalie Aaron Frankel had been a brick wall, and in the rare instances that a puck had actually made it anywhere in the vicinity of the net. Okay, let me read that. That was not well read. Star goalie Aaron Frankel had been a brick wall in the rare instances where a puck had actually made it anywhere in the vicinity of the net. Nonetheless, the U.S. insisted, leading up to Thursday, that the rematch would not be a cakewalk. Quote, knowing the pressure of that moment, the energy in the building, said forward Kendall Coyne, it's going to be different. And she was right. From the opening face-off, it was immediately clear that a different Canada came ready for battle. The Americans looked not only mortal, but downright overmatched. The 12 Olympic rookies on the Team USA skated as if they were stunned by the moment. Canada played with speed and physicality that knocked the Americans on their heels. The U.S. was sloppy with the puck and struggled to keep possession in the offensive zone. The confidence and swagger that had so recently defined Team USA had deserted them. When Canada took a 1-0 lead in the second period, it was the first goal the Americans had conceded in 352 minutes, or nearly 6 hours of action. Believe it or not, American Layla Edwards said before the game, we have been challenged. I guess about maybe the prior games or something. They had not been challenged like this, however. But even as the seconds melted away, the Americans continued to believe they would eventually recapture the magic that had propelled them through the Olympics. And it showed up when they needed it most. With her equalizer, the 36-year-old Knight became the all-time American goal scorer in the Olympics. Then, with one flick of the wrist, Keller became an Olympic hero. And the Americans, the team that looked unbeatable, proved that they would not be beaten. Now they have gold medals to show for it. Okay. Now, with U.S. men's hockey, the article starts off, this time last year, American hockey player Quinn Hughes was sitting at home devastated. An injury had forced him to withdraw from the hotly anticipated Four Nations face-off, meaning one of the NHL's top defensemen would have to watch Team USA battle the best teams in hockey without him. Throughout the tournament, U.S. head coach Mike Sullivan stayed in close contact with Hughes, especially with the Olympics on the horizon. Hughes was out of sight, but not out of mind. Sullivan said there would be a time that he would join the group. On Wednesday, with the U.S. on the verge of disaster, that time finally arrived. Playing in the quarterfinals against Sweden, Team USA found itself clinging to life, trying to survive sudden death overtime. That's when Hughes received a pass on the boards, slid the puck to the middle of the ice, and unleashed a blistering wrist shot that clanged off the left post and into the net to secure a 2-1 victory. Same score as the U.S. women's team. It was precisely the sort of moment that the Americans had envisioned for Hughes, even if it had come 12 months later than anticipated. This time, I'm here, he said. The U.S. arrived in Milan with virtually the same roster that lost to Canada last year. The most notable change was the addition of Hughes, who averages more ice time than any other player in the National Hockey League. Wow, that's interesting. As the U.S. prepares for Friday's semifinal matchup with Slovakia, that I think is at 3 p.m. today, Eastern Standard Time in Buffalo, Hughes is tied for the most points on the team with 6. He provided an assist on Team USA's first goal Wednesday that appeared to be the decisive blow until Sweden tied the game with just 91 seconds left, which sent the game into overtime. The Americans had always figured that at some point they would be confronted with 3-on-3 overtime, which is a madcap, frenzied version of the sport, where there's only 3 players on each team playing. No one is better in that setting than Hughes. He is renowned for his elusive skating and elite puck-handling ability, allowing him to excel on the wide-open ice of 3-on-3. So, when overtime began, Team USA immediately realized exactly what they had to do: get it to Quinn. And sure enough, Hughes came through for them. All right, well, that's exciting news. I think Norway is leading on the medal count. I think followed by Italy, followed by the United States. Not sure who's behind the United States. Let's see here. Here's an interesting business development. Walmart loses the U.S. crown as the top company by revenue. For nearly 2 decades, Walmart has been the country's largest company by revenue, a status that it touted to prospective hires, employees, and its suppliers. It called itself a, quote, Fortune 1, close quote, company. On Thursday, Walmart lost its crown. Amazon.com, a 31-year-old company, surpassed the 63-year-old Walmart as the country's largest company by annual revenue. Walmart had $713.2 billion in sales in the year through January 31, compared with Amazon's $716.9 billion for its most recent full year, a narrow difference that has been years in the making. It marks the rapid rise of Amazon from its beginnings as an online bookseller started in Jeffrey Bezos' garage to a behemoth now seeking to dominate sectors across the corporate landscape, from cloud computing, artificial intelligence, and entertainment to online sales. For Walmart, it highlights the reality that Amazon's sales are growing faster than its own. Last year, Amazon's sales grew 12.4%, while Walmart clocked in a mere 4.7% growth. As Amazon grew over decades, Walmart had to change its business model to adapt. In that way, Walmart was, quote, driving the bus, and now they are riding the bus, close quote. Walmart leadership prepared for years to lose the title, according to people familiar with the matter. Some were surprised it didn't happen faster. Top executives reframed the company's goals to more often focus on becoming, quote, America's favorite place to shop, close quote, rather than the biggest or growing fast. Okay. Interesting. Let's see here. What else do we got that's of interest? Pardon me. All right, in world news, headline: Iran negotiates but prepares for war with guess who? Mr. Trump. Why? For someone who said that he was going to keep us out of foreign wars and entanglements, he has done nothing but. All right, Tehran regime tries to lift survival odds in confronting its top threat in decades. Iran's leaders want to reach a nuclear deal with the U.S., but they are also rushing to prepare for war in case talks between the countries fail. Tehran is deploying its forces, dispersing decision-making authority, fortifying its nuclear sites, and expanding its crackdown on domestic dissent. The moves reflect its leaders' belief that the survival of the regime itself now is at stake. Domestically, the Islamic Republic is more vulnerable than it has been in decades. Its leaders are facing widespread popular discontent over the worsening economic picture and the mass killing of protesters in January. That was disgusting. God. Well, I suppose it's like our ICE. Meanwhile, the U.S. has deployed 2 aircraft carriers and other warships and jet fighters to the region in preparation for a possible attack. Quote, Iran is facing its worst military threat since 1988, close quote, when the 8-year war with Iraq ended, said Farzan Sabet, an analyst on Iran and Middle East security at the Geneva Graduate Institute in Switzerland. Quote, Iran is preparing for strikes by putting its security and political leadership on high alert to prevent decapitation and to protect its nuclear facilities. Iranian officials have presented some concessions in pursuit of a nuclear deal, but Vice President J.D. Vance, here comes trouble, Vance on Tuesday said the offers have fallen short of the red line set by the U.S. that wants Iran deprived of the ability to make a nuclear weapon. While Iran's foreign minister publicly said the talks had made progress, the government now fears that the gap between what Tehran is willing to offer and what Washington is willing to accept may be unbridgeable. Okay, well, stay tuned. And let me again take this moment to remind you that you are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. And let me wet my whistle. President Trump is weighing an initial limited military strike on Iran to force it to meet his demands for a nuclear deal, which would be a first step designed to pressure Tehran into an agreement but falls short of a full-scale attack that could inspire a major retaliation. The opening assault, which, if authorized, could come within days, would target a few military or government sites, said people familiar with the matter. If Iran still refuses to comply with Trump's directive to end its nuclear enrichment, the U.S. would respond with a broad campaign against regime facilities, potentially aimed at toppling the Tehran regime. On Thursday, yesterday, Trump said he would decide his next moves on Iran within the next 10 days. Later, he told reporters his timeline was a maximum of about 2 weeks. Quote, we're going to make a deal or get a deal one way or the other, he said. White House spokesman Anna Kelly declined to discuss what course the U.S. would take, saying, quote, only President Trump knows what he may or may not do. Never a dull moment with this White House. God almighty. All right, in other world news, Russia and Ukraine aim to keep Trump happy as the talks stall. In talks about ending the war, Ukraine and Russia have converged on one goal: to avoid angering Trump by appearing to block peace. They continue to send delegations to talks mediated by U.S. officials who applaud their constructive attitude and report back to Trump, who seeks a deal in Ukraine as his greatest diplomatic victory. U.S. brokered negotiations in Geneva this week ended like other talks this year, with no one able to point to any real movement. The head of Russia's delegation called the talks, quote, tough but businesslike, close quote. Oh, jeez. Ukraine's chief negotiator described them as, quote, substantive, close quote. The U.S. special envoy hailed the talks as, quote, meaningful progress, close quote, without specifying. The upbeat diplomatic buzzwords belie the impasse in a peace process that many observers and even some participants said has turned into political theater. Quote, these talks aren't moving us closer to ending the war, said the former U.S. ambassador to the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. It's a game to avoid being blamed for Trump's failure to end the war. President Trump's success in bringing both sides of this war together, including at 3 trilateral meetings has continued to generate meaningful progress, said Trump's spokeswoman, Anna Kelly. Both parties agreed to update their respective leaders and continue working towards a deal. Trump has said he is mediating to stop the loss of life, even though the U.S. is an ocean away and the war should be Europe's business. He told the World Economic Forum meeting in Davos, Switzerland in January that a deal between Russia and Ukraine was, quote, reasonably close, close quote, which I'm sure is not true. Most recently, Trump has returned to blaming Ukraine, of course, a country that has spent 4 years holding back a full-scale Russian invasion. Trump blames Ukraine for not agreeing to a deal that would give away territory vital to its defenses. A senior Ukrainian official said the 3 rounds of trilateral talks this year have amounted to a performance to persuade the U.S. president that Ukraine is not the problem. Moscow and Kiev both fear that the unpredictable U.S. leader could hurt them if he loses patience. Trump has ended the bulk of U.S. aid for Ukraine, but Ukrainian forces still get vital U.S. intelligence support while the U.S. sells arms to Europe that are passed on to Ukraine. Tighter Western sanctions could cripple Russia's ailing economy, especially if they further squeeze its vital oil revenue. And as the costs of its invasion mount, some analysts said Russia needs U.S. help to pressure Ukraine into concessions. A political analyst and former Kremlin speechwriter said, quote, Putin cannot afford to anger Trump, as the Russian economy is rapidly deteriorating and new sanctions are counterproductive. Therefore, Putin is diligently playing the role of a man prepared for a peaceful resolution. The Kremlin did not respond to a request for comment on this. Ukraine openly questions Russia's sincerity about the talks, accusing Moscow negotiators of playing for time by giving history lectures. Quote, I don't need historical SHIT to end this war, Ukrainian President Zelensky posted on his social media platform. It's just a delay tactic. Russia's chief negotiator is a leading architect of the historical revisionism that Putin uses to justify invading Ukraine. The Kremlin's consistent demands include territorial concessions by Ukraine, a restoration of Moscow's influence over Ukraine's domestic and international affairs, unbelievable, and a rollback of NATO in Eastern Europe. Some analysts said the talks are real, not performative. The fact that very little has leaked out about the talks suggests a level of seriousness that we have not seen in the past, said Thomas Graham, a member of the Council on Foreign Relations and a former White House official. Well, whatever. Wow, here's a former South Korean president gets life sentence. Wow. He was sentenced to life on charges tied to his bid to impose martial law in 2024. Seoul, that's spelled S-E-O-U-L, Seoul, I think is a Seoul court sentenced former South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol to life in prison for leading an insurrection during a short-lived attempt to impose martial law. The court convicted the 65-year-old on Thursday on charges of insurrection and conspiring with military officials to mobilize troops in December of 2024. The decision is expected to be appealed. Prosecutors sought the death penalty, arguing that he planned to declare martial law as much as a year in advance. The court found there was not sufficient evidence to support that claim. The former president is now serving a 5-year sentence for separate charges, including abuse of power, obstructing justice, and falsifying documents in relation to his failed martial law bid. I hope President Trump reads this and sees what can happen if you're put on trial for abuse of power, obstructing justice, and falsifying documents. South Korea's justice system moved fast after Yoon invoked emergency powers, arguing the country had fallen vulnerable to North Korean Communist forces. He was impeached within weeks and then removed from office last spring and been in prison since July. He had won the South Korean presidency in 2022. He was a former career prosecutor. When the verdict was delivered on Thursday, the former Korean president gazed straight ahead as the judge delivered the sentence in the same courtroom where former military rulers and presidents had been convicted of treason, corruption, and other charges, according to the Associated Press. Okay. All right, here's a film review. A movie entitled Epic. Capital E, capital P, small I, capital C. Not sure what that means. All right, so Epic, Elvis Presley in concert, close quote, offers a kinetic look at the rock star's performances in the last years of his career. It was right there the whole time, hiding in plain sight. EPIC, quote unquote, is an acronym for Elvis Presley in concert. Oh, so that's what EPIC stands for. Okay. All right. The master showman, Mr. Baz Luhrmann, B-A-Z Luhrmann, the master showman, or at least show off, of musical cinema, gives fair notice of his purpose in a big screen offering tailored to IMAX, entitled Epic Elvis Presley in Concert. Mr. Luhrmann, who brings his Moulin Rouge love of gaudy excess to everything he does, could make a spectacle out of a trip to the grocery store, and he can barely contain his glee at applying his talents to Presley's. This razzle-dazzle documentary serves as a companion piece to Mr. Luhrmann's 2022 dramatization of the life, quote, Elvis, close quote, which reached a delirious yet doomy climax with its recreation of Presley's 1969-76 Las Vegas residency at the International Hotel, now known as the Westgate, where the entertainer sometimes seemed commanding and charismatic and other times seemed bloated, haggard, and strung out. He would die at age 42 in 1977, his heart weakened by years of drug abuse, I think primarily pharmaceutical in nature. Concert films generally try to make viewers feel as if they've experienced a single show, but Mr. Luhrmann is probably correct to guess that today's audience wouldn't sit still for that treatment of a long-dead entertainer. Instead, the effect is a visual and oral, A-U-R-A-L, collage, after a lengthy introduction that flips rapidly through hundreds of still photos and dozens of clips from Presley's Hollywood Follies period of starring in third-rate formula pictures. Mr. Luhrmann finds the singer eager to get back to his roots. Presley says he wants to rededicate himself to connecting live with fans who are seen being grateful to the point of weeping and rushing the stage, stealing kisses, and in one case, hanging on to the fringe of his costume to the point of having to be pried off. It's good to be the king, but it can be a little frightening as well. A typical Luhrmann number edits together 2, 3, or even more performances in different costumes with a heavy reliance on close-ups and even extreme close-ups that, on a movie screen, lend godlike stature to the subject. Rapid-fire editing. Seldom does a shot last more than 3 seconds. Rapid-fire editing, interspersed with fan reactions, sometimes layered with audio of comments made by Presley, create an immersive delirium. The incomparable star is a vision in studded white or powder blue jumpsuits, cavorting, emoting, karate chopping, and spreading the bat wings of his sewn-on cape in a move that never fails to thrill the audience. More than 50 different songs appear, sometimes impatiently cast aside by Mr. Luhrmann so that he can jiggle and rotate his kaleidoscope again. Mr. Luhrmann is a purveyor of tabloid cinema, punchy, entertaining, sensationalist, intensely allergic to stasis. It isn't exactly to my taste, but then again, 1970s Presley isn't either. I'm old enough to remember when the King was on tour. My older brother and my father attended one of his shows circa 1975 in Massachusetts. I didn't go because I wasn't interested, but even when I was 9, Presley struck me as an embarrassingly grandiose and Okay, let me read that again. Even when I was 9 years old, Presley struck me as embarrassingly grandiose and cheesier than Wisconsin. Yet Mr. Luhrmann successfully makes Presley's concerts fresh again. When the singer announces he's rolling out a new song, so new that he has to read the lyrics off a sheet of paper, it's 1972's Burning Love, which is a great song. That was his last top 10 hit. The director typically makes it into a carnival ride, a whirling montage that turns smoke-choked 70s Vegas into heaven. Other songs are used to lightly brush at themes delved into in the 2022 film, such as, quote, "You're the Devil in Disguise," backs up images of the wicked impresario Colonel Tom Parker, while the song "Always on My Mind" is decorated with touching shots of Presley with his only wife Priscilla and only child Lisa Marie. Suggestions of Presley's ultimate fatal attraction to drugs go unmentioned, though there are scenes where the King looks like a sweaty eggplant. Not sure what that means. For years, screen Elvis meant exasperatingly phony displays like the movie Fun in Acapulco, the movie Girls, Girls, Girls. Mr. Luhrmann has done us all a service by combing through the available footage, coming up with many clips the public hasn't seen before, and delivering an Elvis who in the 70s was not always at his best, but was still a spangled dynamo. It's been almost 50 years since he died, but Elvis is alive again. Interesting. And I just wet my whistle. Let me remind you that you are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Here's a review of a television 6-part series based on a true story. And it's entitled Portobello, 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 in Italy, a travesty of justice. A 1980s TV host accused of being a member of a criminal organization. The article starts, "Hell hath no fury like a paranoid Italian psychopath who's been ghosted by his capo." I think capo is a mafia term. So, he might bear false witness. He might create one of the more shameful episodes in the history of Italian criminal justice, but he might also inspire a true crime series like Portobello, which hath no shortage of righteous indignation while also being an epic, a thriller, and even a lament. The madman is Giovanni Pandico, who is a Neapolitan mobster known as, quote, the lunatic, close quote, as we are told through introductory titles to the 6-part series. It is perhaps no surprise when Pandico expresses to his cellmate's bewilderment an utterly irrational hatred of TV presenter Enzo Tortora, host of the eccentric 1980s variety show entitled Portobello. It makes even less sense than Pandico's slavish devotion to his boss, Raphael Cutolo, founder of the murderous Nuova Camorra organization, or why, after Cutolo is transferred to a less dangerous prison and stops answering Pandico's letters, that the latter would, in a kind of lovelorn state, accuse Tortora of being a drug-dealing member of the Camorra. All right, I'm just getting a little confused, so I imagine you are getting confused about all of these names and plot turns and so on. And so I think, in deference to you, I will move on. Okay, let's see here. This is kind of a book review. It's subtitled Becoming Martian, Martian. In March of 1995, a Russian cosmonaut returned to Earth after a record 14 consecutive months in space. Extended weightlessness generally wreaks havoc on the human body, often disrupting the space traveler's heartbeat, balance, and hormone levels. Ailments like anemia, kidney stones, and osteoporosis can arise as well, and most returning astronauts can barely walk under the sudden chains of gravity. However, the cosmonaut determinedly strutted around for reporters and masked any discomfort with a grin. Then he made a triumphant announcement. His trip, he said, proved that human beings can reach Mars. Among certain space geeks, colonizing Mars is an obsession. Elon Musk has made several grandstanding predictions about when he believes humankind will reach the red planet. But in this book, entitled Becoming Martian, How Living in Space Will Change Our Bodies and Minds, bureaucrats and policy wonks are drawing up plans too. Quote, the author, Mr. Solomon, who wrote this book, Becoming Martian, he was astonished to see how extensive and serious the plans for human space exploration had become. These include everything from rocket blueprints to detailed nutrient recycling programs involving flies, chickens, and human waste. Sounds lovely. Motivations for wanting to colonize Mars vary. Some crave adventure, while others see the planet as a backup home in the event that Earth is rendered uninhabitable by an asteroid strike or runaway climate change. However, the author, who is a biologist at Rice University, noticed important gaps in such conversations. He writes, quote, there wasn't much discussion about the long-term consequences for human beings. How would colonizing Mars alter us psychologically and physiologically? And his book grapples with such questions. It takes a while for the author to get to the answers. Early chapters include some well-worn tales, such as Darwin, comparing space exploration with Darwin visiting the Galapagos, as well as saucy sections on sex in space, and why the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, also known as NASA, refuses to fund studies on it. And he spends a lot of time, possibly because it's the only aspect of the project for which data are available, on the stresses and consequences of weightlessness, which astronauts would experience only on the way to and from Mars, not being on Mars. Once the book delves into Mars itself, however, it really starts to hum. In brief, Mars is hostile to life in numerous ways. The soil is packed with poisons, and massive dust storms obscure the sun for months. The atmosphere provides almost no oxygen, and while temperatures can reach 70 degrees Fahrenheit, that's only at the equator at noon in summer. Temperatures of minus 100 degrees Fahrenheit are more common. Wow. The weak atmosphere and magnetic field also allow carcinogenic cosmic radiation to pelt Mars's surface. One day spent outdoors there equals about 2 years of radiation exposure on Earth. Perhaps most importantly, Mars has only 1/3 of Earth's gravity, which would alter the development of almost every organ and tissue. Anyone born and raised on Mars would likely have lower bone density, and weaker hearts. Their spines would curve less and their feet have less of an arch. The limited air and food would likely stunt their growth compared to Earthlings, and their lungs and circulatory systems might struggle to deliver oxygen. Over generations, their skin might darken to block radiation damage as well. And that's just the start. Those traveling to Mars from Earth would almost certainly be screened to limit the pathogens they would carry along. Measles, malaria, influenza, and dozens of other illnesses would not exist there, which sounds great, except there's good evidence that a lack of exposure to microbes early in life can leave the immune system on a hair trigger, meaning the first generations born in Mars would likely suffer from far more autoimmune diseases. Would that trade-off be worth it? Question mark. Psychological complications could arise as well. The harsh environment would confine people to living in domes or underground shelters where boredom and isolation would be real dangers. The need for protective spacesuits outside such habitats would also cut off Mars's inhabitants from nature. Natives of the red planet would never know the feel of the breeze lifting their hair or the sun warming their skin, and the lack of water would deprive them of the joy of splashing around in a pond or the surf. Parentheses. When now Senator Scott Kelly returned home after 340 days on the International Space Station, the very first thing he did was jump into his backyard pool. He said, "I'll never take water for granted again." As Mr. Solomon notes, these issues raise serious ethical questions. Would it be fair to raise children in a place where they can never play outside? Equally troubling, some Mars enthusiasts insist that we should try to genetically engineer the first generation of visitors to make them less vulnerable to bone loss, heart weakness, and other health problems, permanently altering the human race. There's also the question of whether humans on Mars will evolve into another species. After all, geographic isolation often drives speciation on Earth. Speciation, spelled S-P-E-C-I-A-T-I-O-N. Not sure what that means. Radiation on Mars and the planet's different disease burden would only speed up mutations there. The author of this book estimates that significant steps toward speciation could arise within 5 to 10 generations. The irony would be acute. While many enthusiasts view Mars as a refuge to save humankind from disaster, its inhabitants could quickly become non-human. Wow. Partly as a result of the moral quandaries, Mr. Solomon, the author of this book, finishes his book far more ambivalent about colonizing Mars than he was at the outset. He says, quote, "Whether we choose to let evolution play out or guide the process ourselves," he concludes, "each generation born on Mars will be one step further on a path toward becoming something different," meaning toward becoming Martian, close quote. Whoa, that's something. Elon Musk wants to go there. Well, if he took Trump, that would be a good idea. All right, and I think that will conclude today's reading. You have been listening to a reading of articles and features from the February 20th, let's see, I'll make sure I get the date, from the February 20th, 2026 issue of the Wall Street Journal. We read from the Wall Street Journal every Monday through Thursday at 11 p.m. and then Friday at 6 p.m. Your reader today has been George Collins. Thank you very much for listening, And I look forward to reading to you next week. All the best.
Coming up next in the Niagara Frontier. The following program is intended for listeners who are blind, have low vision, or have another